This is The Water Table.
A chance to hear the agricultural side of these issues.
A place for people to go find information and education.
Water management is just going to become even more critical into the future.
How misunderstood what we do is.
I would encourage people to open their minds and listen to this dialogue.
Welcome to the Water Table Podcast. I have Kent Rodelius joining me again with Todd Stanley. Todd is a farmer and a drainage contractor from northern Minnesota, from Grigala. And we're going to have some really interesting conversations with Todd about how he ended up in northern Minnesota, what about his farming practices, his drainage practices, and just kind of a roundtable discussion. And I hope it's very educational. Before we start, I wanted to just share, I've gotten a lot of really encouraging texts and emails from people just saying that this podcast has been really needed in our industry and that they're learning a lot. And so thank you so much for those. Other people have said, hey, we just don't know that much about Prinsco. So, always feel free to reach out to me, Jamie D at Prinsco.com, JAMIED at Prinsco.com, or our website, Prinsco.com, to learn more. And we're just going to keep bringing you information on these podcasts. So hopefully over time, a lot of the questions you might have get answered through the podcast. So I wanted to start by welcoming Todd Stanley. Todd, good to have you here on the phone today. What we were just visiting about earlier, a beautiful, November morning in northern Minnesota. So welcome to the Water Table Podcast.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, Kent.
It is a real pleasure to have you with us today, Todd. I was thinking about this podcast and how the great number of people I've met over my career, and I have to say that you would be in the top list of people I enjoyed stopping and seeing and talking to, sitting around the kitchen table. So that was always good stuff. One thing I remember about your house, Todd, is you had a milk cooler, commercial milk cooler in the house, so you could just get a glass of milk anytime you wanted. And I thought that was always a pretty unique feature, but good memories. But the other thing I was thinking, the number of people listening to this podcast, how many of them could take a map of Minnesota and tell us where Grigala is? Just a little burg up in northern Minnesota. It is spelled Grygla if you want to look it up. But what a unique place to live and wonderful place to farm, Todd. But this morning we thought we'd maybe start off just by having you tell us a little bit about your family history, your story of how you ended up farming in northern Minnesota.
Sure, Kent. Both sets of my grandparents lived in what's now called the Red Lake Game Refuge, about 25 miles east of Grigala. At the turn of the century, they put a drainage system throughout this area, a surface drainage system. They call them judicial ditches and county ditches. And it was the impetus in the first place was to create a milling district in Thief River Falls for sawing wood and milling wheat. They assessed all the land that was homesteaded, of course, so people didn't pay anything for the land, but then they had to pay taxes to pay the ditch bonds off. And a lot of people lost their land in the Depression. So both sets of my grandparents did not lose their land, but when the government got, and this would be the state of Minnesota, when they got a certain percentage of the land, they just forced the other people out and turned it into a game refuge. And so they relocated both sets of my grandparents to the Grigala area. And in 1937, my grandpa and grandma bought the place where my mother lives now, and they gave someone $15 to clear 5 acres by hand so that they could build a house there. And they built a new house and a new barn, and that's still the nucleus of our farm is where my mother lives. Drainage has always been a big deal to us. My grandpa did soil conservation service ditching with a D4 cat, 2 D4 cats he had in the 50s. And my dad did some of it in the 60s with a D2 cat and a little Eversman 2.5-yard scraper. Huh. And so that was our start in drainage. And so we've been about improving land in this area and turning it into nice big square fields and efficient farmland. It's flat as a tabletop here. There's no hills or anything to work with. So you have to create your own drainage.
Todd, how did you get started farming? Did you work with your folks and just get into farming in that way?
Yeah.
Is that something you always wanted to do?
It was in me from the beginning, but it was probably what some people would call a silver spoon. I was just out of high school and working out and thinking of moving away, and my dad, he thought I should farm, and he told me he thought I should farm, but we couldn't farm together. We were both too headstrong. And so he helped me get started. We farm about 7 miles from the home farm came for sale. The guy was retiring, and so we bought that. And Debbie and I have been here now for 45 years. It was the fall of 1975 when we bought this. And so my parents retired in 1997. So in 1998, we rented their farm, or most of it. And it's been a good run for us.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You tell that story, Todd. I didn't know when you started, but Kent and I met you. We drove up to Grigala in the spring of 2000, and so 20 years ago now. But Prinsco started in 1975 also. So our time frames as far as in business, you're in your farming business, and us in manufacturing are in the same year. So that's an interesting connection also. But as Kent mentioned earlier, Kent and I had some really fun times together early on in my career, and one of them was taking that long drive north. And I remember when we got to your house and we talked about we thought we were some slick salesmen and really good at what we do. And when we finally ended up making that first deal with you, and I'm not saying this verbatim, but what you pretty much said is, you guys showed up, nobody else does, so I'll buy from you. And that's how our relationship started. But you and Kent especially created quite a personal relationship along with a business relationship built on trust and doing what you're going to say you're going to do. And so I'm really pleased to see Prinsco's about relationships, and it doesn't have to be my personal relationship, but about our people building relationships with our customers. And so it's really gratifying to see that happening with good people like you and your family. So thank you for that. But I'd also like to just hear more, Kent, if you have anything to say about that day when we went up there. I can remember, it doesn't happen too often for us, Todd. It's probably natural where you live, but made that long drive and sitting at the kitchen table, and like Kent said, the milk, and your wife brought out some brownies and just had a real conversation about what your dreams were for your farm when it came to improving it. And there's a lot that's been done in the last 20 years to improve your farm, and we'll talk about that in a little bit around what you've seen, how drainage has impacted your farming operation. So,
Todd, one of the things that always interests me is to ask people who have been the major influences in their life. What people have helped you. What caused you to learn. What things how have people spoken into your life and given you opportunity or encouragement?
So, I don't have a professional education. I finished high school, and I didn't go any further in schooling, but whether I was in trucking, tiling, farming, there was always someone to be a mentor who was more than happy to give their expertise and their experience and their judgment to me and share it without expecting anything in return. They just put it out there. And that's the same in the tiling business. I mean, I didn't know anything about it when I started. And so I got to meet some people who were really influential in tiling, of course, were Steve Kroll and Roger Ellingson, Del Detterman, and Hugh Kent, and the guys from the University of Minnesota and NDSU that put on the tiling school, the engineers and stuff. They were, if I had a question, I could call, and everyone always got right back to me, and they were very forthcoming. As far as influencers otherwise, my exposure is maybe a little limited, but my parents, I had a grandmother who was a school teacher. She was always really interested in what I was doing. And so she gave me a lot of, what do I want to call them? Little sayings that were encapsulated the situation, kind of reduced it down to 6 words a lot of times that really applied.
What's your favorite saying that your grandmother had for you?
Oh, well, my favorite one is, so she was a tough lady. And when she was 70 years old, her hips were shot. And she would, if she stood up too fast, one hip would pop right out of the socket. And she'd stand on the other leg, and you could just see the color drain out of her. It hurt so bad. And she'd grab that thigh and twist it around and pop that hip back in the socket. And then she'd stand there for a second, and she'd look at you and smile, and she'd say, "Things are wearing out." And then she went on about her business. She didn't expect any sympathy or anything. It was a matter of fact for her.
It takes a lot of pluck to live up in that area and keep it going. So good stuff, Todd. Todd, I think switching gears here a little bit to talk about your start doing some tiling or some water table management. I think you and I first met in Marshall at a tile clinic put on by the University of Minnesota, talking about the value of tiling. And from there launched our relationship. And eventually, like Jamie had said, we ended up at the kitchen table with you there on the farm and getting going on a long-term relationship. But what are the events and circumstances that convinced you to start tiling your ground? What were those things?
So it's not uncommon, and especially before we raised any late season crops, it's not uncommon for it to be really wet here at harvest time. And just struggle and wait for it to freeze and everything else, trying to get your crop off. And of course, when you want that stuff to happen, it never does. And you're out there day and night putting new inventions on the combine, trying to get it to go a little further in the mud, and rice tires and duals and tracks, you name it. The conventional wisdom around here was that the soil is so tight the tile won't work. The water won't go anywhere. And what convinced me to try it was in 1999, in the spring or in the winter, I guess, we had the University of Minnesota had it was a grant, I guess you'd call it. They sent a team of farm operation experts to look over your farm, your operation, your accounting system, your management system, your forecasting, all of that. And so we had 2 county extension agents, we had a banker. I can't remember who all was here, but the 2 county extension agents, one of their recommendations was that we start tiling, because when you looked at our profitability, and we all like to complain about low prices, and low prices are certainly a factor, but the years when we had really bad years in farming here was the years we had no production or low production. It wasn't, what was killing us was not the prices as much as the weather. And so when I said, we don't have much land we could tile, even if we wanted to, because our outlets aren't deep enough. And most everyone's familiar with Hans Condell from NDSU. He was the Red Lake County Extension agent at that time. and he comes from the Netherlands, and he said, where I come from, if we weren't willing to pump water, we wouldn't have farmland. So he said, no outlet is not a reason. You can make an outlet with a pump. So that spring then, trying to decide where to go, and I talked it over with Dad, and we agreed that we had a 180 that it's the only 80 we'd ever own in that section. So we wouldn't have to figure out how to get an outlet for some land behind it. So we decided to tile that 80, and we hired field drainage. They came and looked at it. They said they could do it. And so we put in 80 acres of tile in the spring. And of course, just a fluke, but that fall was really wet. And so we struggled to harvest, but that 80 we had harvested, and my dad wanted to work that 80 every other day because it was the only place on the farm that was dry. To double back a little bit, that summer, we talked about tiling, and he told me, I know you'd like to tile this farm, but it's just too expensive. You're going to have to get it out of your head. You'll never be able to pay for it.
This was your dad that said this to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But after that fall, he was the one that every year he was just pushing. This needs to be tiled. This needs to be tiled. And it all needed to be tiled was the truth. So, but to pick and choose where we were going to go the next year was a little more difficult. But anyway, after 1999, we tried to hire them to put another quarter in the fall, and they were too busy. They couldn't get here. And then we made the decision to buy our own machinery and start doing our own. And so in 2000, we bought a pull-type plow and a wore-out backhoe and a stringing trailer and auto grade for laser, and hooked it all up to a John Deere tractor, and that's how we tiled the first fall. We tiled during the day, and we did all of our tillage operations at night. So we ran the tractor 24 hours a day.
Quite a commitment.
Yeah, and that wasn't very efficient. So the next summer we ended up buying a D9 cat to pull the plow with. And that worked a lot better. We used that for 11 years after we bought that.
Yeah. Did you find that it was just, if you wanted to be a production drainage contractor, you needed to really get into to better equipment to do so?
Well, at the time, we were only planning to do our own. We didn't have intentions of doing anyone else's. So our farm is scattered over 20 miles. At that time, we were farming 7,000 acres. And so it's time to change shifts, and you got 1 hour left where you're at when you're tilling in the morning. Well, if the guy stays there an hour to finish before he moves home, then you got your crew standing, plus your day is wasting away on your tiling operation, and that's on a schedule too. So it's just so inefficient. The tractor was back and forth a lot more than it should have been. And the other thing we found is that with ag tractor, it's either moving or it's not moving. There's no torque converter. So you don't get very efficient use of your pulling capacity. But when you have something with a torque converter, you can match the power to the load.
Sure.
And you can just pull so much more.
Sure. Makes sense.
Sounds like a lot of work, Todd.
Well, everything's a lot of work. That part,
it's progress.
Yeah, that's right.
Who did you go to for advice and help? You said you had that group that came up. Did you have people that helped you with that aspect of learning how to tile, or was it seat of the pants or experimenting, or every piece of ground is different? Every piece of ground is different. But honestly, we pretty much did it by the textbook from that tiling school the first year. We didn't know any shortcuts. Sure. And I still have the books here that I got there for figuring out spacing and all of that stuff.
and the tiles, the size of your mains and all of that. And now, of course, after 20 years doing it, then you adapt some of it, and a lot of it you can do seat of the pants. But just about the time you think just because you've done it, is when you get you find out that you don't know.
Yeah. And, it's interesting just listening to you, because Kent and I know you. A lot of people listening on this podcast won't know you, but it does from my perspective, and, you can speak to this, or Kent too, but it does take a unique individual to do what you've done here, and built a sizable water management installation company. And because it isn't just as easy as going to Marshall and learning. You're pretty humble, Todd, on that, but it takes somebody that's willing to work really hard, and you do have you're a little bit sneaky smart up there in Grigla, Minnesota too. So we can't pass by that. That's a fact. So
the one advantage I had that not everyone would have is that my dad was retired, but he is still really active. And so he took care of all the fall tillage and stuff around the farm. He managed that. So once we got done harvesting wheat, I just took usually 3 guys with me, and we went and tiled. And that's all we did till it froze up every year. Mm-hmm. I had to get the soybeans out. But other than that, we were able to dedicate one crew to tiling. So many farmers buy their own machinery and get all set up to tile, and they're going to do it in their spare time. And the reality is they don't really have the spare time. So all that machinery, and usually 1 or 2 semi-loads of tile, turns out to be yard furniture. It just doesn't go anywhere.
That's exactly true. And you have to really like and appreciate what tile will do for you to be committed enough to do your own tile. And I've always said that the guys that are professional installers make it look too easy, and anybody thinks they can do it. And it's nothing but hard work in tough conditions. Yeah. And you have to really bear down and get it done.
But it's instant gratification, You plow in that tile and you come back to start the next one, and the one you just put in is already flowing. It's very satisfying to see that it's working right away. When you're standing in ice water and trying to splice something together that's underwater, then it's not always so gratifying. But
5 buckle boots days.
Chest waders.
Yeah, that's right.
For sure. I just wanted to also mention earlier on, you stated, some of the influencers in your life, and specifically talking about the water management business, and as you got into that, and you mentioned a few names. You mentioned Del Detterman and Roger Ellingson, Steve Kroll, who worked for Roger Ellingson, and Hans Kendall, and also Kent. And if you look at, for those of listening to the podcast that don't know those names, but all of them very influential in our industry, and probably, just guessing, but a couple 100 years of experience in that group of 4 or 5. And so pretty interesting to me that, not knowing what you were going to say there, you're good at picking help for your own education and knowledge. Those are some really influential and really knowledgeable people in our industry. So if somebody is looking at doing some drainage and wants to know more about those names, please reach out to Prinsco too. So.
What strikes me about those guys, and what I always remember, is how generous they were. A lot of what they're sharing with me was proprietary knowledge, that actually they had a leg up on me in their business, but they were more than willing to share if I had a question or an issue, and still are. I still call them to this day for things. And so it's that makes an impression on me, that someone is that generous.
I think when I look back at how the northern Minnesota, and specifically the Red River Valley, has changed in the last 20 years from the standpoint of acceptance of drainage, you mentioned earlier around everybody was saying, this ground won't drain. It's too tight and it won't work here. I mean, how many times did Kent and I hear that? And I'm just so grateful for people like Kent and yourself, Todd, and the other names you mentioned, Roger and Dell and Hans, and you mentioned Hans was over at Red Lake at the time. Kent and I would stop in there often and see him, and you could just feel the energy at the time, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, around knowing that this would work and having an energy, and yet coupled with a frustration that wasn't able to get his message out the way he wanted or the way he hoped at the time, because it just wasn't moving fast enough, and how that has changed. So, for those of us in agriculture, should be forever grateful for people like Hans, and then those that were early adopters, you and the Ellingsons and field drainage up in that area, because it's brought us to where we are today. And, it's part of the questions I want to get into here in a little bit, but what has you've now done the drainage? What has that done for your farm, and how do you see that moving on to the next generation, because you have your drainage in place? So I'll probably let Kent ask those specific questions, but I just wanted to share that because I think it's important for our audience to know that these early adopters have paved the way for all of us in agriculture. So thank you for that.
Good stuff, Jamie, and those are good reminders that we had to get a good foothold and start up there before it has kind of taken off. But before we leave getting started, Todd, and move on to your operation, what were the most challenging aspects of starting? Was it permitting? Was it, convincing your lender that this was the thing to do? Was it design or outlets or a combination of those things? What are the challenges when you start an endeavor like you undertook?
Well, there's one every day, but the bigger issue was respecting the power of the water. You don't leave anything open, because if it fills up with water and floats your pipe up, there's nothing you can do. And when you try to pump it down and dewater it so that you can fix it, then it sloughs from everywhere and you just got one big soup hole. And so we had to learn, if you're going to come back tomorrow and hook up to this pipe, some laterals into a main, you still cover it, and tomorrow you dig it back up again, because if you leave it open, it'll be a mess in the morning. Rocks were a bit of an issue, but they didn't slow us down too much. At first, we tried to dig every one of them up as we were there, but then we learned to, of course, the laser days were different than GPS now, but we learned when you hit a rock and it knocks the plow off grade, you just put a flag in when it was on grade and when it was back on grade, and then you just go with the backhoe and dig it up in between and splice in a chunk of pipe. Then we had to learn that you have to do that right away, because where you're knocked off grade, that's just like a dam in the pipe, and then you get water above it. And then that's what I was talking about, standing in that ice water trying to make a connection. Laser was an issue with the wind. That we'd always struggle when the wind blew, and we'd fold the wings up on the chisel plow and park it upwind from the laser, trying to build a windbreak, and you had to get it stationed so that the chisel plow wasn't in the light. So that was some things you had to learn, and it wasn't always smooth. But now with GPS, that all goes so much nicer.
There's been incredible technology leaps in grade control.
Yeah. For me, the surveying part and stuff was always easy, because we've done, like I say, my grandpa did surface drainage, my dad did surface drainage. That was part of my world. We talked about fall and slope and all that kind of stuff. That was part of the conversation all the time growing up. So I didn't have any trouble understanding what you needed to do to make something drain.
Sure.
Lift stations, we did some really stupid things in the beginning. It's a miracle no one got hurt. But we were learning. And now, of course, that all goes a lot better too. But that was the experience that we needed to put them in.
Yeah, you go to school every day. And Some days you learn more than others, and other days go better than others, but certainly is a learning curve.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit. But what would you say are the significant benefits of managing water on your farm, Todd?
So I think it brings our average yield up. Another plus for us is we think we can farm with about half of the tillage and planting equipment that we could otherwise per acre, because you get more working days, and so it's easier to stay on schedule. Some of the poorest land, what used to be the poorest, it wasn't poor because of the dirt. It was poor because the water table was high and you just couldn't ever get it to dry out. And now once you get the tile in there, it's some of the best land. So some of our poorest, what used to be our poorest land is now some of our best producing land. It made the biggest difference on those fields.
Yeah, so that's really part of where you're saying it brings the average up, is the average was really quite, low on those poor pieces of ground, and that brings that up to as good as the best ground. Just knowing your area a little bit, and knowing, like you say, how wet it can get close to harvest, and how that can really play a factor in non-tile ground, and in it just being a struggle from late summer when you start harvesting the wheat until freeze up.
2019 was a perfect example. Everyone struggled to get their soybeans out, and all of our soybeans, every acre happened to be on tiled ground in 2019, and we had one of our best harvests we've ever had as far as acres per day with the combines, and we didn't tear the fields up, so we didn't have to till them. That's one more thing I forgot to mention about the real benefits is we've reduced our fall tillage down to almost nothing now because of the tile, because we know in the spring the fields won't be sour.
And when you had, I guess I don't know that much about this, so that's why I asked this question, but when you have untiled ground and you don't do any fall tillage, don't you see that ground taking a lot longer to be ready in the spring just because it's not black?
Well, that's not an absolute, but it sure can be. Doesn't absorb the heat. The water doesn't go out the bottom. What can happen is if it rains just a little bit and seals off, you can't get in there till in July. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you haven't worked it to fall before. Corn stalks and wheat stubble are the worst. Soybeans and canola, you got a pretty good chance of getting in them. But corn stalks and wheat stubble, that ground can seal till if you do work it, it's nothing but bricks of clay.
Yeah.
It seems like an awful lot of guys are interested in tiling to reduce their risks. And, it's the risk of too much water and not enough water. And those are the things they're looking to eliminate. And the efficiencies that you get from having your ground tiled or the water table managed is really significant to your whole farming operation and the pace that you can do things and the schedule you're on. It's really quite remarkable.
Well, and the other thing, it's more fun to farm when you're not fighting the elements. And so that just removes that from the equation. That endless struggle of dragging that chain around and bending something, breaking something.
Yeah, it's interesting you you say that, and then you brought up 2019 and how the entire year of 19 was such a struggle for so many farmers. Another unique thing is almost every year in the market network that Prinsco serves, we have an area that's dry, we have an area that's wet, that kind of thing. But the last 2 years have been 19, just extremely wet everywhere from the entire Midwest. And 2020 being, out of the last 20 years, probably one of the more enjoyable growing season for a farmer. Pretty easy to get the crop in the ground, great spring and a great fall to get the crop out. And also having, a really good growing season in between. So, that's the world we live in, is that, give it a couple of years and you're going to see quite a difference in the weather patterns. And, so I just wanted to highlight that around what you say there is, it was really, you could just see it in farmers' faces when you would talk to them in 2019. The grind they were on was significant.
Todd, one of the things that was interesting when we first went up to the valley and started poking around and talking to people like yourself is the general reaction from farmers was it's cheaper to buy more land than it is to tile my own land. And I can just farm more land and make more money that way. Do you have anything that you would comment about that?
We were so sold on it once we got started that we just pretty much put the machinery purchases on hold and land buying on hold, and we just concentrated on getting tile in the ground every year. And I had a lot of support. I don't know if this is germane or not, but I'll tell it. In 2002, we had a poor year here, and I only had a little bit of tiled land. I actually had 50 bushel wheat on what was tiled. But with the disaster payments and everything, I did poorer on the land that I got 50 bushel wheat on than where I had 8 bushel wheat. The next summer, Dad asked me what I was going to tile, and I said, I don't think I'm going to tile anything this year. I didn't have a very good year last year, and I got to play a little closer to the vest. And he didn't say anything. But the next day when we were having coffee, he said, if I borrow some money and pay for some tile, will you increase my rent like you do with Hoffman's? Because I had another landlord that paid for his own pipe, and then I increased the rent. I said, sure, that's a win-win for me. I don't have to borrow the money, and I get to farm the tiled ground. So pipe was cheap then. It was only about $100 an acre for pipe, So he went and borrowed $100,000 that fall, and we tiled more than that. We tiled 1,300 acres that fall for him on his land. And so that gave us a big boost. That was 2003. That was one of the years that then we started to get towards 50% tiled, so we could change our farming operation to suit the tile.
Well, I can't help but tell you, Todd, tile is still cheap. Still a good investment.
I would agree with you 100%. Yeah. But it depends on your horizon a little bit,
for sure.
And so I always tell the older guys that, there's a place for you. You might not farm long enough to get your money back, but the young guys need your equity to get it in there so that because the land needs to be tiled in this area. There's just no getting around it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Todd, how is the lending community reacted to tile in your country? Are they supportive of a guy coming in who's going to buy another quarter and saying, down in a lot of areas that we work in in the Midwest, the banker will say, well, you can buy that quarter as long as you have enough money to tile it, because he'll know it'll support it. What do you hear from lenders up that way?
And so I can't specifically address that question, Kent. I never took a mortgage for tile. I always did it out of my working capital and just kept absorbing it. And so I can't address that other than anecdotally. I have borrowed plenty of money against my land, and when it gets appraised, it always gets appraised higher with tile than without.
Sure. What would you say what impact has water table management had on land value in the Red River Valley, Todd?
Well, there isn't much tiled land that sells.
Well, that's pretty telling. People want to keep that so they know what's happening for sure. If you were talking to someone getting started that was contemplating tile, or buying more land or investing in better equipment, how would you rank tiling as a management tool in your operation?
Well, for me, the land and the tile are hand in hand. I mean, any land that I would buy, I would instantly tile it. If I couldn't, I wouldn't buy it. Rented land's a little more difficult. If the landowner doesn't want to come up with the money, and like now the land that I rent that isn't tiled, they would let me tile it, but I got to farm it long enough to get my money back out. Otherwise, I got nothing to sell. And my age is against me there, so I'm not going to farm that long. So we don't do it, but it should be done.
Do you, up in the area where you live and in the valley, Todd, do you hear much criticism of tile systems from the general public? You have people that, why do you think it still remains so controversial?
Well, there's some. I actually have some neighbors that are very critical of it. And nitrates is one part of the equation. Jealousy might be another part. There's the age-old thing about flooding, putting more water in when you're flooding. We still got, actually our local watershed, the administrator would just love to force us to not pump if there's downstream flooding anywhere. And to me, the water we're pumping is a small portion of what would have run down that ditch if this tile system wasn't in there.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, and we'll be doing, sometime in 2021, we'll do a podcast on that. It's really hard for the general public to understand that a subsurface drainage system actually reduces the flow of the water to the river or stream where the flooding's happening, comparatively to if that ground is already fully saturated and then it's running across the surface. So, that's probably not for us to get into and totally explain how that works today. But, as you mentioned that, I just thought it was worth noting that, that is one that we can get into from an education standpoint on why actual, tile ground with a pump does not create more flooding.
I mean, but that perception becomes reality when someone's got water issues. Why they see that pump running, they think that's the cause of it.
Yep.
And the other issue here is frozen culverts. Everybody's always worried about the culverts freezing up if the pump is running in the winter, but I can honestly say I have never seen it happen, not even once. I've seen culverts frozen, but it's because it rained in January or February and filled the ditch up and it froze the culvert solid, but it's not because of the pump.
Well, this is really great stuff, Todd, to talk through, and sure appreciate you sitting down with us. Now, at the present state of your operation, You said you farmed with a pull-behind plow for 11 years?
We used the pull-behind plow for 13 seasons.
Okay.
And then we bought a self-propelled Wolf 540 in 2012.
That was quite a step up.
It was. However, took us a long time till we could get more pipe in the ground per day with that than we could with the pull type. There's just some nuances to the plow that we needed to learn.
Sure.
And but now it works really well.
So you've now just this last year you sold your operation to your son Bill. Is that correct?
Yeah, last December.
Okay. So hopefully he'll continue on with the passion and the interest that you have, Todd.
Yeah, I sure hope so. I mean, it was a win for me. The equipment's still in the area for maintenance, and if I do want something tiled, I can hire him, and I get to help a little bit. This fall, I helped him on a couple jobs, and so I even got to have more fun. It was about 50 miles away, and I'd fly up my plane up there and land on the township road and run the backhoe or the dozer, and then fly home again in the evening.
Sure. Nice. Well, as we kind of wrap this up, Todd, sure would like to give you a chance to add anything you would like to add. One thing I wanted to ask you a little bit more about is ever since I've known you, Like I said, I enjoyed coming up to visit you because I always learned something. If you listen enough to people who have great life experience and are passionate about what they do, you certainly hear some great stuff. But one thing I've admired about you is you've been a lifelong learner, and you've never sat still and just wanted to do things with the status quo. How did you make yourself do that, or what habits did you develop that really paid great dividends for you?
So by nature, I don't look back. Very little. I'm always about what's, and not in a bad way. I'm not worried about what could happen to me or what could go wrong, but I'm always looking forward. How can I make this better? There's got to be a better way. I never look back at what happened. If you ask me, I have dates in my mind. I could tell you when things went bad, but I don't do postmortems on all of our operations and try to figure out where we went wrong or where we could have made more money or anything else. I'm just always about the future. And so that, and I guess you'd call it my heritage. I'm just third generation of it. And some of it's instinctive and some of it's passion. But when I look at a piece of land, I could lay you out a blueprint for what you need to do to turn it into good farmland in just an hour. If I think it can be done. Obviously, there's some land that I don't think should be farmed that isn't ever going to be economical, I don't think.
Sure. And, that's what I get passionate and excited about also is when you just look at something and think of, there's opportunities for all land, right? There's opportunities for recreating. There's opportunities, for farming. And if we can take land that should be farmed, or that is most of the land today is farmed, but just make it better, and then take the land that shouldn't be and buffer that and make it into a good recreating piece. It's exciting to me about taking that land and just improving it, because like you had said, you already said in this podcast, but, using less equipment, you can get far more out of less land using less equipment, you start adding all that up, and the environmental impacts are really positive too, that come out of improving land and making it better. It's just less work, less energy put onto it.
That's my argument about the environmental impacts of improving the production on the farm. Is there's nothing more wasteful than to dump fertilizer, chemical, burn diesel fuel, and produce a poor crop or no crop. That is the biggest waste there is. When you put those inputs in it, if you get a good crop, you've got a return for any environmental impact you had. At least you're getting something back.
Yep, for sure. For sure. So I think we wanna end this with kind of what would we call it, the water table takeaway, Todd, and what would you like to leave people with? What's your kind of the final word here?
Well, a couple little pearls of wisdom, I guess. One of them is in all the travels, and I've heard this from other people, so it isn't just me, but all the travels, all the people I've talked to, I've never run into anyone who said they wished they hadn't tiled. Everyone who started was glad they did. And the other thing I would say is if you're questioning the economics or the productivity or the fit for your farm, just take one piece and try it. See what it does for you.
All right. Well, there you have it. Right from the mouth of Todd Stanley. He's never heard anyone that has tiled say they wish they hadn't done it, and also encouraging, just try it. And we're all here to help, including, Todd talked about people in this industry that have been kind enough to help him and answer his questions. And I can guarantee you that if you wanted to talk to Todd, if you're questioning whether you should hire a contractor or whatever it might be, he would be more than happy to share more on a personal level his experiences with that. So We're going to leave you with that. Before we go, I just wanted to, Kent and I would just like to personally thank you again, Todd, for your business over the last 20 years and more than that for your friendship. It's meant a lot to us, and it's been a really enjoyable hour reconnecting here and talking about some old stories and hopefully educating those listeners on what we do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. We've always had a great relationship with Prinsco. I got to say, I've never bought a roll of tile from another vendor, ever. So every roll, not every roll I put in for other people that came from other vendors, but here, every roll that I put in this farm has been Prinsco pipe.
And we appreciate it. And when I drive to Canada fishing and drive through that country, I can just see the beauty of the land and know that there's a lot of our product under there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great day.
Yeah.
If you enjoy what you're listening to, you can find us on your favorite podcast platform. You can find us on Twitter or Facebook, and you can also find us at watertablepodcast.com. Thanks for listening.